بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So tonight inshallah we're going to discuss a few masaail, continuing from the masaail on animals, which animals to slaughter, and tonight mainly we're going to discuss the defects found in an animal, and connected to that will be how many people can suffice to sacrifice an animal, and we're going to touch on those things mainly tonight inshallah. So the next mas'ala that comes, they're mentioning how many people can share in a sacrificial animal. So we'll start off first with a badanah. When we say badanah, or when the fuqaha say badanah, they refer to a camel, and what they also include at times is a cow. Because the cow will most of the time take the same rules as a badanah, as a camel. So they say 7 people, or they say up to 7 people can share in a camel or in a cow. So up to share is 7 people. So 7 people or less can share in a cow or in a camel, which means 7 people paying, or 7 owners of the cow or the camel, they can then slaughter this. So it cannot be more than 7, but it can be less than 7. If it happens to be more than 7, let's say more than 7 paid for this, let's say, and they didn't realize. So what would happen here is the person, one of them would have to back out. One of them would have to back out and say, I'm not part of this udhiyah, right? If that doesn't happen, then the one who came last has to back out. Or if the animal is slaughtered, we're going to discuss on that just now. But now the eighth one is paid. The person didn't realize, the person who on behalf of the 7 people are going through, who's going to get them the animal, the cow for example. So then he didn't realize 7 have already come. So the eighth one comes. None of the 7, we said either one goes out. One volunteers to go out. None of them want to do that. So then we look at the last person, the 8th one who came. The last one who came, we tell him, sorry, here's your money back. You can't be part of it. The 7 are they already filled. Okay, he doesn't want to, or he can't not want to, because it won't count for udhiyah. But let's say you don't know who's the last one. In this situation, then you can draw like names to see whose name comes out, and that person, he's the one who has to go out. He is the one who has to go out and not be the 8th person. And if now they slaughtered and they realize, hold on, 8 people pick their hands up saying everyone who was part of this animal, they put their hands up and they happen to be 8. What do you do here? They say you slaughter a sheep. You slaughter a sheep in place of the last person. So in that case, a cow and a sheep, that in reality would be 7 shares in one. So for 8 people, and that's how you do it. If it turned out 9, then you slaughter 2 sheep. Then you slaughter 2 sheep. That's how it would work there. If it happened to be more than 7 people for a badanah. Now, with regards to the badanah, they say a few things. Number 1, there's a point at which no more people, or not any more people, can join in. So we said up to 7, right? But until when do we call it that now, let's say 2 people have paid for the animal, and then there's a cut-off point that no one else can come in, even though they're only 2. So we say this connects to what we're going to discuss in the upcoming lessons, when there's ta'yin, when a person or those who've paid, they've made the intention, along with what includes the intention when we discuss it, and they've specified an animal. So while they've not, you see, intention is one thing in Hanbali, according to most of the ulama. We'll discuss it in details when we come to it. So merely buying the animal with the intention of udhiyah will not make you now liable to slaughter this animal. Well, you can still change your mind, you can still do this or do that, as we'll discuss in details. But once these people decide that this is our animal, then at that point, no other person can share in this animal. That means, let's say 2 people have put in money so far. 2 people have sent in, let's say, this animal is $700. So these 2 people have put in $350. They bought the animal. So the animal is there. The animal is there in the backyard, for example. They have not specified yet, specifying, as we're going to mention, by articulating, or an action, to say this animal is going to be for udhiyah. The intention is there, this animal is there. On the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, when it's the day of Eid, we'll then take this, then it will be finished. That is our animal to slaughter. So now, at this point, they've not specified the animal yet. Another 5 can come in. Another 5 can still come in voluntarily, or they can pay an amount and then you just divide it however they wish to do about it. But at this point, still more people to fill in the remaining 5 spots, they can come. They can come. But now once these two, they've bought the animal, they said, this is our animal, we are slaughtering it. That's it. They've specified the animal now for udhiyah. Now in this case, if a third person comes and says, I want a share in this animal, unfortunately it will be too late. Unfortunately it will be too late, so he can't get a share in this animal. So basically, until the animal is specified amongst those partners or those who've put in a share, until the specification, more can join if the 7 is not already filled. If the 7 spots are not already filled. And before specifying that that's our animal and that's it, there's still scope for the 7 spots to be filled still. So I hope that mas'ala is clear. Then, connected to this, they say that we say the 7 shares. So let's call it 7 options in a cow or in a camel. So the ulama say that those 7 people who are going to have a share in it, each one does not need to have the same intention. Each one does not need to have the same intention. So it's not that, okay, since we are slaughtering this animal or we are buying this animal for udhiyah, that all 7 people have to intend udhiyah. One of them could, for example, he has a mahdhur of ihram that we spoke about in the last lecture. He's done something that he's not supposed to do in ihram, which necessitates slaughtering an animal. So a sheep or a share of a badanah, or a share of a badanah. So this person, he says, let's say 2 people bought the cow, they want to slaughter for udhiyah, right? A third person comes before specifying this animal, he says, I did a mahdhur of ihram and I need to slaughter an animal and I need to slaughter a sheep, so I want 1 share in this cow. So he can do it. A 4th person comes and he says, well, I am slaughtering, let's say for Hajj, if this was done in Mecca. These people are slaughtering in Mecca. And he says, I have to do a hadi. A hadi is the animals that you slaughter for the hujjaj. The hujjaj slaughter a hadi. There's more details to it, but this is just by way of example. It might not fit exactly in fiqh, but it's just to make the point that everyone doesn't need the same intention. So this 4th person wants to slaughter for hadi. So we say it will be fine. A fifth person comes in and he says, I just want meat. I just want to put a share in, take the meat, sell it, eat it, whatever it is. That's fine. So each of these people do not need to have the same intention. Each one can have any intention. To the extent the fuqaha say, even if it's a non-Muslim wants to take a share in it, it doesn't matter. Because you have to get 1 share. That's your wajib, or that's the sunnah. For you to fulfill your sunnah, if we say it's a sunnah, or if we say it's a wajib, 1 share will do the job. So in that share, it doesn't get affected by the other 6. It doesn't get affected by what's the reason of the other 6. Now this applies whether it's more than 1 person having the shares, or it's 1 person. So that 1 person can decide, 1 share I'm going to have it for udhiyah, another share I'm going to have it for a mahdhur of ihram, a 3rd share I'm going to have it with the intention of just meat, a 4th share I want to get to sell, for example. That will not affect. The only one here is that the Hanafi madhab say that each one of these shares must, everyone who participates in the share, either more than 1 person or the 1 person himself. Basically, the intention of each share must be a form of ibadah. It must be something that is linked to an ibadah. So it can't be then you want to eat the meat, because that's not specifically an ibadah. Or it can't be I want to get a share to sell, because that's not an ibadah. So as long as it's an ibadah or connected to an ibadah, or could connect or take the rule of an ibadah, then those shares are fine. Then it's fine to have those shares. Connected to this, we say everyone can have 1 share. That means not less than 1 share. So that means, let's say this animal, you're going to get from it, let's say 35 kg, 35 kilos, you're going to get out in total that you're going to get out of this animal. And here, let's say 7 people have gotten a share. That means that each person's share is 5 kg. Each person's share is 5 kilos. That means that if somebody says my share is 4 kilos, he's done under 1 share, and that means his udhiyah would not count. It will not count. So not less than 1 share. And that takes us to a mas'ala. A very interesting mas'ala, and that is dividing the meat. So we said everyone must get equally. Because everyone needs at least 1 share. Everyone needs at least one share. Then once you get the one share, then we're going to discuss it later, how to distribute or what to do with this one share in terms of eating, in terms of gifting, and in terms of giving in charity. And the fuqaha say it's obligatory to give a portion of this meat in charity. We're going to mention it, we're going to mention amount and details of it later when we come to this mas'ala. But the fuqaha say eating from it recommended, giving as a gift a portion of it recommended, and then charity, a portion of it, at least a little portion of it is obligatory. So basically, so you have to get this portion. So that means the division should be equal. You have to weigh and give it equally. You have to weigh and give it equally. Now what happens if, for example, you cannot distribute equally? Either you cannot weigh them. For some reason there's no scale or something to be able to weigh each portion, or you just can't divide the specific part of the animal, whatever it may be. The point is, at this point, we cannot give each person an equal amount. Then what? Then here one could think and say, well, then anyone can just forego that 2 kg that he's supposed to be his, that he can't get. Let's say in our example, out of 5 kg, he can only get 4. The 1 kg, another person who's not getting 5 but got 6, and you cannot divide it properly. Or of eye, you can tell that this one is slightly less. One could think that he can just say, it's okay. That person who has slightly more, it's okay. Now that is correct and it's incorrect. That is correct and it's incorrect. Now very interesting, this mas'ala, it has more details on the Hanafi madhab. It's very interesting how the Hanafi fuqaha look at this mas'ala and how the other fuqaha look at it. So starting with the non-Hanafi, or the other ulama, how they look at it. So they say, now we said it's correct and it's incorrect. It's incorrect in the sense that you can't get less than a share. You can't get less than 1 share. So you have to get your full 5 kg. You have to get your full share. But it is correct if the person knows that I am supposed to get my share is 5 kg. He knows that portion is mine, and then he allows that person to keep it with the intention of a gift, because you're allowed to gift it. You're allowed to gift it. You're allowed to gift it. So in that case, it will be permissible. It will be permissible where he allows it because he knows it's a gift, but it should be his. It should be his. And they allow this kind of imprecise division because they say this mas'ala is built on iqraru haqqin. It's basically where everyone has a right in the animal. They have a right to 5 kg in the animal. It's theirs. It's just about dividing it. It's just taking your right. It's taking your haqq. Why do we mention this? Because meat is one of the items of riba. Meat is one of the items of riba because it's weighed. Therefore, when you exchange ribawi items of riba, meat for meat, if it's from the same animal, meaning cow from a cow, cow from an ox, cow from a bull, same like kind of group of animals, then it has to be equal and it has to be on the spot. So you make an exchange of money. Let's say you take dollars for pounds. They don't need to be equal amounts. So $10 for 20 pounds, for example, but it has to be done on the spot. But dollars for dollars, for example, this is an example. 10 for 10. You can't say 10 for 11. You can't say 10 for 11. Even this example, it's just by way of fiqh, because this one here, there's actually difference of opinion and a bit more details that we'll go to it when we discuss it in riba, but not here, because here we're mentioning udhiyah. I just want to make the point. So therefore, since you're exchanging an item of ribawi, this is meat. So let's say meat of a cow for meat for a sheep. It has to be done on the spot, but it doesn't need to be 5 kg of cow meat for 5 kg of sheep meat. It can be 5 for 10, whichever way, as long as it's done on the spot. So now here, you're exchanging the meat from the cow. So does it have to be equal? The fuqaha say this is iqraru haqq. This has to do with taking a right. So they don't look at it as having a connection to a transaction. They don't look at it as having a connection to a transaction. Hence the division here does not, it has a bit of easiness going to it. Compared to the Hanafi madhab, who say here it must be precise. It must be precise. Why? Because they say this is where riba enters to it. Riba enters to this aspect. They say why? They say there's a kind of ownership taken. There's kind of giving somebody ownership, and there's a kind of an exchange happening. It has a link to an exchange and a link of exchange of ownership in a way. So therefore, the aspect of riba falls into this. Therefore, they say it must be equal. They say it must be equal. Connected to this, in saying it must be equal, one could think that, well, 5 kg, it's mine. I can just allow, we can just all agree that we're dividing it here. They say mujazafatan. So they just, by chance, they're just assuming that, they're taking a chance, they're just eyeballing it, how much amongst the 7. The Hanafi madhab would say no. They would say no. They say it must be equal. We said on the other side that way it could fit and how it would be correct and incorrect, but the Hanafi madhab would say this is incorrect. It must be equal because it's riba. So they say it's got a connection to ownership, connection to an exchange, so it has its connection to riba. So therefore they build this mas'ala differently, connecting to the chapter of riba. Now this is very important, very interesting, the next few things we're going to mention on the Hanafi madhab, just to see how amazing the minds of the fuqaha and how they connect the masaail and their precision in all the masaail. So now here you could say, let's eyeball it, because basically 5 kg, it's mine. I can just allow somebody to take more, right? The Hanafi madhab say that it doesn't go like that. It doesn't go like that. Why? First of all, we said the riba aspect. But number two, they say, since it's a ribawi item, since item where riba and interest comes into it, you can't just agree on somebody taking more, somebody taking less. Because for riba, you can't just simply be okay with the transaction. You can't just be, it's okay, we just make doing a riba transaction. I'm okay with it, he's okay with it, so we're going with it. They say no, you can't just be okay with the transaction and allow each one to get more than the other in riba. So they block the door of riba in the chapter of riba, but again here, since it has a connection to riba, they apply it here as well. Because if they open the door, so look how the precision of fiqh, that even though, but look where it starts, their way of looking at it, their lens from looking at it is that it has a connection to a transaction. And the other fuqaha say, no, it's just taking your right. So it doesn't have a connection to a transaction. That's why they are not so precise on the riba rules here compared to the Hanafi fuqaha. And that's why you can't just forgo, you can't just say, it's okay, I'm just going to give you more. You can't give more, because then that would be kind of allowing riba. So in other situations, it's okay, we're just going to do this transaction. Here's $100, pay me back 120. I'm happy, you happy, it's okay. They say no, it won't be allowed. Number one. Number two, they say that while yes, you are entitled to 5 kgs from this cow or this camel, but there's kind of ownership. So that ownership comes in when you've taken it. Before you've taken it, each one has equal kind of ownership there. So you cannot just off the bat gift, because you do not only own this. It's kind of shared until it's distributed. So you can't decide to gift what doesn't only belong to you. And that's because how they connect the masaail. If you and somebody else own, let's say, a car, and you want to gift the car to somebody else, but you and your partner own the car, you can't make this decision on your own. So the same here. Look how they bring the masaail in. Now they say something else. They say now, in the case where you cannot get equal distribution, or you cannot, so you're distributing it, you're eyeballing it, plus minus. How do you get out of the riba aspect? They say if the riba is in the meat. So now if there's an aspect that's not meat, so now they say you put in a piece of bones or a piece of skin or a piece of the head. So one person is going to have, his eyeballing it is less than somebody else, but you put a piece of skin there. You put a piece of the skin with it, with the one who has less. And with the other one, you put a piece of the head, for example. So now what happens? There's meat and there's an item. Another guy only has meat. Another guy has meat and an item. So what happens here? This is a mas'ala they speak about in riba, commonly known as mas'ala ajwah. So what they mean here, they have a mas'ala where they speak about if a person exchanges, they have a portion, let's say 1 kg, even though weighing dates with kg in riba, it's a mas'ala on its own. So let's say 1 kg of dates and let's say 100 riyals for 2 kgs of dates. So now we see dates is an item of riba. So it has to be equal. Dates and dates, irrespective of the type of date. So you have to have 1 kg and 1 kg. But now what's happening here? It's 1 kg and 100 riyals for 2 kgs of dates. So here most of the ulama would say this is a transaction, they're not allowing it. They're not allowing it because it could lead to riba in its own, it may not be riba. And they have the evidence from a hadith of Fadala bin Ubayd radiallahu anhu that has to do with a necklace. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam didn't allow it. It was a necklace and it had some manufacturing in it to be sold for gold without being taken apart to see exactly how much gold for the gold that's been paid with. So it had gold in it and there was an amount. It was bought by gold. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, no, don't sell it like that until you've counted exactly how much gold, you know exactly what it is. So I'm not explaining this mas'ala in details, I'm just indicating to it. So majority of the ulama look at it like that, and they have other explanations, but the Hanafi ulama, they say, when you're going to trade 2 kgs of dates for 1 kg of dates and 100 riyals, what's going to happen here? We're going to say that 1 kg of dates in place of 1 kg of dates. And the other 2 kgs go for, the other 1 kg of the 2 kgs goes in place of the 100 riyals. So they say to the riba of 1 kg will go for 1 kg. The other one will have for the product, will have for the item on the side. So even if it were to be 2 kgs of dates and let's say a pen for 1 kg of dates and let's say a hat, for example. So they'd say with the exchange that's going to happen here, even though it's happening at the same time, they'd say 2 kgs of dates for the hat and 1 kg of dates for the pen, and the riba is out. The riba is out. That's in more details they have. We'll discuss it more in details when we come there. But what we wanted to point out is how the fuqaha work. So here in this mas'ala, yes, meat for meat, but put something with the meat. So if the one is getting, let's say, plus minus 3 kg, and the other one is 5, yes, he's full 5. But the one with 3 kg has the skin, with it. So skin is not the ribawi. The riba item is the meat. The riba item is the meat. So 3 kg is for 3 kgs of meat. And then the 2 kg, that one has extra, goes in place of the skin. So like that it becomes equal, you out of the riba aspect even in the distribution here. So that's one very interesting, very deep mas'ala that the Hanafi fuqaha mention. But they say if nobody wants to actually take the meat and they want to distribute it, no one wants it, in this case they all are agreeing, however many of them, 3 of them, 5 of them, 7 of them, but not more, then in this case you don't need to actually wait because all of them are agreeing to distribute it. And even if we say it's a shared gift, hence here everyone is agreeing, so there's no need. So there's no need to weigh up and everyone specifically gives out. They're going to all give it away and it will count as a charity they need to give, and everyone would have given it away. So in this case, there would not be riba as well. They're falling into this anyway. So look at how the fuqaha look at the masaail. And if somebody wants to deduce a wrong or right mas'ala, they have to come to the correct starting point to analyze the mas'ala. You have to look, the Hanafi fuqaha's lens of this mas'ala is very different to the others. So you have to touch on that point if you want to debate an opinion. You have to know where to start. Not they just oppose the evidence. Look at the entire way the fuqaha build the masa'il. Look at their starting point. And anyways, that's a very important, intricate, interesting mas'ala. Then they say so now we're done with the badanah, with the camel or with the cow. So for a sheep, 1 sheep for 1 person. So 1 sheep for 1 person. So there you cannot have more than 1 person. There you cannot have more than 1 person as an owner. Let's phrase it like that. You cannot have more than 1 person as an owner. In saying that, the cow and the camel mas'ala, up to 7, but in the maliki madhab, you're not allowed to have people being co-owners in terms of them paying or them owning. You can only have more than 1 in terms of intention. What intention? And that we're going to discuss it now. So now for a sheep, they say 1 sheep for 1 animal. 1 sheep for 1 person. They say 1 sheep for 1 person. So 1 person can pay and own a sheep in terms of ownership. Then in terms of intention, a person in his 1 sheep or in his 1 plus share of a cow or a camel, or in the whole cow or camel, in terms of intention to get the reward of slaughtering, he can include however many people he wishes. Living or deceased, he can include them in terms of reward. In terms of ownership. So you get 2 things. You have tashreek and ishtiraak. So ishtiraak is in mulk or milk. So ishtiraak is in terms of ownership. How many can own a share in this animal? Cow and camel, 7 people can own a share. In a camel, in a sheep, 1 person only. That's for ishtiraak. And then tashreek is for reward. So tashreek, a person in his share of an animal, in his share of an animal, if it's a cow or a camel, then in his share or his shares, or in the entire animal, or in his one sheep, in terms of reward, he can include as many people as he wishes. There is no limit. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam slaughtered an animal on behalf of himself, on behalf of his household, and on behalf of the entire ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who did not slaughter. So that is a lot. So all of them are included. So everyone is included in terms of reward. You can include however many you like. Now connected to that, most of the fuqaha, other than the Hanafi madhab, they say that slaughtering an animal is sunnah. So they say it's sunnah ayn, sunnah ayniyah, sunnah ayniyah. Fuqaha of Shafi'iyya and Maliki phrase it like that. They phrase it like sunnah ayniyah. Hanafi madhab, everyone who owns the nisab on the day of Eid or on the days of Eid, the days of slaughtering, if he owns the nisab, he has to slaughter. It's wajib on that person. It's wajib on that person to slaughter. And we have the details, if you didn't slaughter, if you slaughtered after the days, etc. We'll touch on it when the fuqaha speak on the mas'ala, on the rule of udhiyah. So now back to our mas'ala here. So now they say it's sunnah ayniyah. That means it's a sunnah for each person on its own to perform the udhiyah. So if a person slaughtered on behalf of, let's say, all the people in his town, in terms of reward, it's fine. In terms of reward, it's fine. He can do that. He can include even more. But the aspect of sunnah falling on behalf of those people would not be there. The aspect that the sunnah being fulfilled and cut off and they to be fulfilled on behalf of them won't be there. It will only be fulfilled where, here's our mas'ala, and that is on behalf of a person's household, in terms of a person's household. So for every person, for the sunnah to be ticked off by them, they have to perform it himself. Everyone has to perform it himself, except if they're part of a household. If they're part of a household, then as a start we say if one person in the household slaughters on behalf of the household, then the sunnah aspect would be ticked off for the entire household. So a lady, for example, a wife, children who are under the husband is the one, or the father is the one who looks after them, the sunnah aspect is mainly in the husband. So if the husband does not do it when he can afford to do it, then they are not needed. The sunnah aspect, it's not specifically for them. It's specifically for the husband, because you can do it on behalf of your household. The sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the sunnah of the Sahaba, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu says, كان الرجل في عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يضحى بالشاة الواحدة عنه وعن أهل بيته. That a man used to slaughter in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam one sheep on behalf of him and his household. So the main aspect is on the man of the house, the person in charge of the expenses of the household, basically, to do it on behalf of the household. But in general, it connects to sunnah ayniyah, on being a sunnah of every person. So if the leader of the household does not do it, it falls on behalf of the others, because it's on his neck mainly. They can do it and recommended for them to do it, but it's not a must. It will not be that they have missed the sunnah. It would just be like, it wouldn't be an X by the sunnah. It will just be like a dash, because it's the main thing. Main thing is on the lead of the household, the Rabbul Bayt. So connected to this, a person would say, what forms the household? What forms the household? So what forms the household here? The fuqaha differ. Let's start with the Maliki madhab. The Maliki madhab says, they say that a person can slaughter on the sunnah ayniyah aspect, the aspect of the sunnah being ticked off, can be done by a person doing the udhiyah himself, or somebody else doing the udhiyah on his behalf. So here, the Maliki madhab kind of differs slightly with what I said just now, in terms of if you include in reward. It does not oppose it, it slightly differs. If you include in reward other people, then the aspect of sunnah will not fall off them. The Maliki madhab say that you can slaughter on behalf of others or somebody else, the sunnah aspect would fall off them. It would be ticked off. As long as you slaughtered an animal on behalf of them alone, meaning not with yourself included. So now what I said earlier was you slaughtering it, and then in reward you included others. Then if it's not your household, the sunnah aspect won't be ticked. The Maliki madhab are there as well. But if you slaughter on behalf of others an animal, and you did not include yourself, then that sunnah aspect would be ticked off. The sunnah aspect would be ticked off. If you want to include on those people, the sunnah aspect would be ticked off on those people. If you want to slaughter on behalf of yourself and others in a manner where the sunnah would be ticked off, the Maliki madhab say that this would count for a person in his household, a person slaughtering on behalf of his household. But who are his household? They say 3 stipulations. Number 1, they say that everyone must live in one house. They must be living in one house. So that means some of them phrase it, some of the Maliki fuqaha, they say babuhum wahid. They say they all enter the same door. The door of the house, it's the same door. Irrespective of what happens inside the door, it's the same door. So basically it's the same house, number 1. Number 2, the person who's slaughtering, those who are staying in his house, they are his family members. So Allahu A'lam, it seems from how some of the fuqaha of Maliki phrase it, maternal and paternal. Maternal and paternal. And lastly, the person who wants to slaughter, those who are staying in his house, that family member who's staying in the same house as him, this person who wants to slaughter is the one who spends on that person. He is the one who takes care of that person's expenses. So basically that person lives off this person who wants to slaughter. If those 3 things are met, then that is the household. That is the household that would count for the sunnah to be ticked off. And this is when a person is slaughtering on himself and then on behalf of others in one animal. Therefore, if a person is not including himself, then he can slaughter. These stipulations do not apply. These stipulations do not apply. Now, before we mention the other opinions of a household, the fuqaha say that the hadith says we used to slaughter, or a person in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to slaughter 1 sheep on behalf of him and his household. So that means many fuqaha say sheep. Many of them say a sheep. So in fact, from the Hanbali fuqaha until, let's say, almost 200, 250 years ago, the earlier fuqaha would not speak on the mas'ala, or most of them would not speak of the mas'ala of having 1 share in a sheep or a cow, and then in that share, you include your family members, you include your household, because most of them spoke about a sheep. So would it be valid to include your family members, meaning your household, in a share that you've taken out of a cow or a camel? Here, there's 2 opinions amongst the later Hanbali fuqaha. Some of them say no, because the earlier fuqaha did not indicate this mas'ala, so it would imply that it would not count. And others have said actually, based on the principles of the earlier fuqaha, this would count. So therefore, if a person were to include himself and his household in 1 share of a cow or camel, inshallah it would be valid. If he can leave it for a sheep, it would be safer. But let's say he cannot afford a sheep, or he can't find a sheep in the place where he is, and he can only afford 1 or 2 or 3 shares in an animal, and he wants to slaughter on behalf of him and his entire family from the share, then he can do so. If he can do a sheep, better, because then he's out of the difference of opinion, as we said in the last lecture. But if not, then he can do it inshallah. So now a household. Here, some of the fuqaha say a household is where the house is one. The house is one, irrespective of how many people are in the house. As long as it's one house, the base of the house, the kitchen is one, the door is one, etc. Everyone in that household, 1 person slaughters on behalf of that household, it would count. Others say whoever's father, if they have 1 father, they are a household. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam slaughtered on behalf of his daughters, like Fatima radiallahu anha, and she was out and married, but she is included in his household. So there is scope, again, a second opinion. But on that opinion, some of the fuqaha, like al-Labadi, he says that some people, that what is meant by household is the father, the husband, the wife, and the children. So he points out that if 2 brothers, for example, were to slaughter 1 sheep, on behalf of their families, on behalf of all of them, it won't count. So he's indicating that this opinion of some of the fuqaha saying 1 father, it's not correct. Okay. Others say that everyone living in the house, if there's the father or the person who's taking care of the expense of the house, everyone in his household, that it's obligatory on him to support, then if he slaughters, it will be completed on behalf of them. That means, for example, everyone in his household, but you only, for example, you have children, but let's say they have gifts, or they have spending, and they've saved up over the years, and they have more. They have enough for their expenses, but They have enough for the expenses, but they're living under you, like most of children today. Until at least after school, they live on their father, they live on their parents or their father. So according to this, the theory of these fuqaha, they would say that those who have extra money to slaughter, we mentioned how much and what not, these people who it's not obligatory on the father to support. It's not obligatory on the father to support. We explained in summary version zakatul fitr, the stipulations of a family member to support. They would say that the son, let's say, who is spending money and he's now 14, 15, he's living under the father. In reality, he's part of the household completely, but since he has enough money saved up or whatever it may be, then the slaughtering would not count on behalf of that son if he's part of the household. Now only the little children who do not have spending, or whoever, not even if they're not little but they don't have their own money, then the slaughtering of the father, which works in theory, but actually the household, the hadith says the household. That's why other fuqaha do not go with this. Other fuqaha do not go with this. And others say, for example, that if they would say everyone in the household, so husband, wife, and then even if his parents, as the husband's parents are staying with them, they're in one household, so you can spend on them. You can, I mean, the one udhiyah would count for the entire family because it's one household. So basically, in summary, and some would also say, let's say two families are staying together. Let's say cousins or brothers staying together in one house. So both brothers have wives and children. So they would say that if each one is supporting each other, they're not living off each other, or they're not sharing, for example, food, groceries are bought together, they're not sharing their expenses, then each one has to slaughter on their own. Each one has to slaughter on their own on behalf of their family. But if they're both sharing in expenses, then one animal can be slaughtered on behalf of both of them. One animal can be slaughtered on behalf of both of them. So the thing is, perhaps groceries are separately, but now you have utility bills, you have water, electricity. Either one, if one is paying for them, that means if one is paying for all these expenses, the rent, for example, one is paying for them, then it's as if the other one is staying with him, even if his own expenses of groceries are paid for himself. So it would kind of still be one household, or they're both sharing together, then it's still one household. And we said, Al-Labadi said that it doesn't count. It doesn't count that you have to be your husband, wife, and children, for example. So basically, these opinions are some of the main ones mentioned in this mas'ala. But we'd say, for example, the best way to do it is a husband, wife, and children, irrespective of the age of the children. And he were to slaughter on behalf of his household, that would count. And his parents, if he has children who can afford and wish to slaughter, and they're older, for example, and they want to do it, then that's better. But if not, then there's enough scope to say it would count. And if he has people living with him, they depend on him, his parents or siblings, family member, even a stranger living in his house, depending on him. Now sometimes depending on the person, let's say groceries, they depend on him, but let's say clothing and other things, personal things, they don't depend on him. But these things kind of to an extent fall into obligatory expenses that the person has to provide for the family member, or the person is voluntarily doing it. So it's kind of 70% on this person, and 30% on the person of the house, and 30% on the person personally. Still too, it's as if he's living with him. So he can still count. If he has enough surplus to do it on himself, that's better. But everyone in the household that are actually a household, now here's brothers staying together, even if they're sharing, for example, expenses amongst each other, if they can afford to slaughter themselves, each one for their family, each brother for his family, better. If not, and they all slaughter together, then that will count. So that means every time it can be afforded, they should try and go out of the difference of opinion. And every time it cannot be afforded, then when there's scope, then it's okay. The Maliki madhab, they're quite accurate in the description. They're quite accurate. To apply that straight away can fit without any issues. And then for the rest, as we said, if it's one household, actually one household, and there's the father or the whoever is looking after the household, sometimes there's a son working, he's looking after everyone, then in this case, and he does on behalf of his household, those living with him, irrespective of spending on them or not, it would count, inshallah. If they were to do it themselves, better, inshallah. Two families staying together, one house, one kitchen, if they were to share, it would be valid. But if they were to do it separately and they can afford, it would be better. So I hope that mas'ala was clear. There's just a couple more things connected to this. This is the ownership in the animal. One person is the owner. One person can be the owner of the sheep. One person can be the owner of the sheep. That means that more than one person, they cannot put money together and buy the sheep. I found some ulama saying that if they putting money in to buy a sheep and they from one household, this is the only chance where more than one person can put money in to buy an animal. So thus all those living in the household put a portion in, let's say $200 from 5 people living in the household, or 5 people of the household, let's say the household is 10. So these 5 people put in $200 each, so $1,000 was bought for the animal, for the sheep this time, sheep that's going to be slaughtered on behalf of the household, and they say it would be valid. In a case where it's not a household, then it cannot count, One person has to put the money in, one person has to put the money in. And therefore, again, we'd say if somebody in the household can afford the sheep himself, then he does it, he should buy it, to get out of the difference of opinion, because this one here, most do not allow. And if not, and they all can pool money in together, and they can do it, they can then buy the animal on behalf of the household, that can count. Lastly, or second lastly actually, they say that what is a solution that the Sharia gives when one person cannot afford the animal, the sheep this time, or a share in a cow or camel, and they can afford if they pool money together. The solution is that each person puts in their amount and then they buy the animal, but the animal is on behalf of one person. So they buy the animal, let's say 5 sons. They buy the animal, the sheep, or the share in the sheep, and it cannot be owned by more than one person. So they put in, let's say, $200 each. So $1,000 they put in for this sheep, but this sheep is on behalf of who? It's on behalf of the mother. So who is the owner of this? Who is the lady? Who is the person who udhiyah is going to be done by? It's the mother. Then the mother can then decide, I want to include so and so in my intention, I want to include my family in my intention, I want to include my sons in my intention. So that means everyone put money together, but the owner is one. Then the mother, as we said, if she makes the intention of the family, when would it count that the sunnah gets ticked off on behalf of, let's say, the sons here, and when won't it, as we explained just now. The last mas'ala is, we spoke about interbreeding between these animals that you can slaughter in udhiyah. So, between the cattle, the 3 types of cattle we mentioned, and the sheep and goat, and the cow. So if there happens to be an animal that is interbred, on behalf of how many people would the slaughtering count? So it's now bred between a cow and the sheep, for example. Because if it's cow and camel, both cow and camel, 7 people. So now this child that's born is 7 people. The child that's going to be born is, this child that's a result of breeding between a cow and a camel, 7 people would equal that this born animal would be counting for 7 people. But now a cow, 7 people, and a sheep bred, and now this animal is born from them. One parent counts for 7 people, the other parent counts for 1 person. So now how many shares would this animal be allowed for people to take ownership in? So the fuqaha say, I think Shafi'i fuqaha touched on this mas'ala, they say if there's an animal that's been bred, let's say a cow and a goat mated, and they got this offspring of this animal that we said is valid to slaughter with, they say the amount of shares that people can own in this animal, they say this animal would count for 1 person. So it would be equal to the sheep. So the lower one, because that's safety. So the lower one is the sheep. We said for age, you go to the higher parent, because that's where the safety that according to the higher parent. And here for slaughtering, you say to the 1 person, it will count for 1 person. And another mas'ala, almost finished. Another mas'ala where the fuqaha mention is that we said 1 sheep for 1 household, or 1 share in a cow or camel in 1 household. So that means 1 house. So if a man has, let's say, for example, 2 wives, 1 wife, in each wife has a separate house. So does 1 animal count on behalf of both houses, because he's the head of both houses, or since they separate households, he has to slaughter 2. This mas'ala I found from some fatawa of the contemporary scholars. That's the only ones who I seen touch on this mas'ala. And they say that one animal would suffice for both houses, because the one who's slaughtering is basically the one in charge of both houses. He runs both houses. But if he can afford 2, and he can slaughter 2, that would be better for him to slaughter 2 animals. It would be better for him to slaughter 2 animals. Okay, I want to mention 2 more masaail before we end off, just to finish this chapter off. 2 very interesting masaail actually. And that is, number 1, we said for a cow or for a sheep, you have 7 shares or 7 options, and you can have different intentions. And even if it's one person, he has different intentions in the shares, then that would be valid. That would be valid. So number one, in the Hanafi madhab, where we said everyone has to have an intention of a form of ibadah or something connected to ibadah. If the person or one of the people have the intention that I want a portion of this cow or this camel, and I want it, his intention is slaughtering for a walima. His intention is to slaughter for a walima. So the walima is basically, when they mention it, they refer to a meal where people are invited to after a nikah. So that's specifically what is mentioned. So if a person intends one of the shares being a walima, because walima is more connected to feeding than ibadah, or does it have a connection to ibadah? That's where the question comes up in. So the Hanafi fuqaha would say, if somebody has an intention for this, would that make now this animal invalid because it's not a type of ibadah, or would it be valid still? So here, I think I found this in Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiyah, where they say that the walima would count. The walima has a connection to ibadah, so one person having a share of that would count. One person having a share with that intention would not affect anything, so that's fine. Another thing is, can a person dual intention, so 2 intentions in what he's slaughtering, between udhiyah and aqeeqah? So now a child is born to a person. If it's a male, and now it's time for udhiyah and it's also time for aqeeqah. Either it's the sunnah time of aqeeqah, or he missed the sunnah time and it falls into one of the times when he can do the qadha of the aqeeqah, if we call it qadha. So can he dual intention aqeeqah and udhiyah in this animal that he's slaughtering? So here we'll say 2 types. There's 2 types of things. Number one, it's in the whole animal. He's going to slaughter the whole animal and dual intention, udhiyah and aqeeqah. The other situation is where he has one animal, one share, so that means a cow, ox, buffalo, or a camel, and one share or more than one share will be udhiyah, and then one share would be aqeeqah. So one share aqeeqah, we say this, maybe I will make a mistake in my speaking by mentioning one share, but what I mean is 2 shares for a boy. 2 shares for a boy, because a boy has 2 animals. So 2 shares for a boy, 1 for a girl. The fuqaha say if one cannot afford 2 shares for a boy or 2 sheep for a boy, then he can slaughter one. So now he has a son, for example. Can he have 2 shares out of the 7 to be for the boy, or 1 share for the girl, and then the rest udhiyah, or 1 or 2 for udhiyah and others share in? So those are the 2 categories. So category 1, let's say there is shares in an animal. So now cow or camel, can he dual the intention? Here the maliki fuqaha and the hanbali fuqaha, they would say in terms of shares, it will not count. It will not count. They say for aqeeqah, you have to slaughter the entire animal. So a share of a goat or of a cow or a camel will not count as aqeeqah. If you want to slaughter an animal other than a sheep or goat, you have to slaughter the entire animal. So you have to slaughter 2 camels or 2 cows for a boy, and 1 whole cow or 1 whole camel for a girl. So therefore it will not count according to them, in this manner of a share. And then for the Hanafi fuqaha and the Shafi'i fuqaha, they allow it. They say each share has its own intention, so it doesn't matter. And they also say one share of a cow or a sheep would count for aqeeqah. So it doesn't have to be the whole animal. Of course, for a boy 2 shares, and for a girl 1 share. So therefore that would count. Okay? And then if it's the entire animal, that means you're slaughtering 1 sheep with the intention of udhiyah and aqeeqah, the entire cow or the entire camel or the entire goat or sheep, then in this case, most of the fuqaha of the Hanafi scholars, Shafi'i scholars, Maliki scholars, and one opinion of the Hanbali scholars is that it would not count. You cannot dual intention this. Each one is separate. Udhiyah is a specific thing, and aqeeqah is a specific thing. Both of them, you have one of the main objectives is to slaughter an animal. So both of them have a specific slaughtering that's intended. Therefore, to combine them into one will not count. The second opinion in the Hanbali madhab is that you can do so. So you can slaughter 1 animal in dual intention for udhiyah and for aqeeqah. Now before we just break down what I explained here, because it's still vague if you process what I said here and you break it down in fiqh, it's still a bit vague, but we're going to say here that if a person can afford to separate them, if a person can afford to slaughter 2 sheep for a boy or 1 sheep for a girl separately, then that's fine, then that's better if he can separate them, aqeeqah and udhiyah separately, especially if he's not Hanbali or Maliki, if he's not Hanbali or Maliki, then he can do it in a cow or in a camel with one of the 2 of the shares, or one of the shares being udhiyah, being aqeeqah, sorry, and the others or some of them being udhiyah. That's fine. If they're Hanbali or Maliki, then it's better not, because we said 1 entire camel, 1 entire sheep. So if a person can afford to separate them, he should do so. If a person can afford to separate them, he should do so. If he cannot afford to separate them, but he can afford to, for example, have different shares. Now this is like a Hanbali or Maliki. He can't slaughter the entire cow, but he can afford the shares in them. So he can then perform aqeeqah based on the other madhahib, then we can say he can do so. He can do so, so he still gets 2 rewards. He still gets the udhiyah and he still gets the aqeeqah. Because the aqeeqah is very emphasized. The fuqaha say even if a person takes a debt to perform the aqeeqah, then he should do so if he can pay it back. If he can pay it back, so it's very emphasized. If a person cannot afford and he can afford more than 1 sheep or 1 share in a cow or camel or however many shares, and then sheep separately, then you should do so and separate the intention still. If not, and he can only at the end afford 1 animal, then what here? Here some of the fuqaha say that from the way the fuqaha phrase this mas'ala, they indicate that if you're doing an intention of udhiyah in aqeeqah, so what will happen here, the father wants to slaughter on behalf of his household and on behalf of his newborn, in 1 animal, in 1 sheep. So now of course for a son he'd need another sheep, right? So if he can afford 2, he should do that. If not, and he just can afford 1, they'd say that it's preferable, because now you have intention of the father mainly, and then his household, and then aqeeqah. So then it's like a triple. So they say, some of them say this won't be valid. What needs to happen is then the household udhiyah is 1, and then on behalf of the child udhiyah, and then aqeeqah in another animal. But in reality that kind of doesn't go, because the child is part of the household, so he would be included in the udhiyah. Then if you can afford another animal anyway, just intend it for aqeeqah. So basically what we'd say is that if the father can afford to have an animal for udhiyah and for aqeeqah, 2 for a boy, 1 for a girl, he slaughters 1 for his udhiyah, and then the other 1 or 2 if it's a boy, and he can afford another 2, separate the intention for aqeeqah. 2 for a boy, if you cannot afford 2, 1 for a boy and then 1 for a girl. If he still cannot afford, then to get both sunnah, then in the one animal he slaughters on behalf of himself and his household, and then aqeeqah. Of course, he can only afford 1 animal, so for the boy it would be the 1 animal. The girl, the sunnah would be 1 animal. So basically what we're saying is every way forward, every step, try and go out of the difference of opinion and do as much as you're capable. When you can't, then fall into where there's scope because of the difference of opinion, and a person can still have a way out and still get both rewards. Okay. The last thing is now here, what if a person dual intentions udhiyah and the walima in 1 animal? If he dual intentions udhiyah and the walima. So here I see the Maliki scholars mention this. Now we're not speaking about a share, because that's permissible. As we said, Hanafi madhab are the main ones who speak about it. The others say it can be any, or at least the Hanbali, I think Shafi'i as well, specifically that I can recall. You can have any intention. Now here, can you slaughter 1 animal with the intention of udhiyah and a walima? So the Maliki scholars touch on this mas'ala, and they say, in this case you can. Because the objective of udhiyah or aqeeqah with the intention of walima, but let's say udhiyah with the intention of walima, they say it's fine. Because udhiyah, the objective is to slaughter, and walima, the objective is to feed. So there are 2 different things. So udhiyah, you can slaughter for udhiyah, and then it's a walima happening the next day or something, you can use that same meat, and because you already knew in your head, I'm going to slaughter for udhiyah, but a walima is coming, I'll use the same meat. Now here, we could tell a person that it's a good thing that he's doing. I'm going to mention this just for the sake of fiqh. There's one more thing that one could think of here, can you dual intention aqeeqah for more than 1 child in an animal? But that we won't touch on it. Here we'll touch on it when we speak on aqeeqah, because this udhiyah is the main thing. So the last thing here, and that is if a person then decides that I'm going to then slaughter for udhiyah, and then a walima is coming up, so in that case I'll get the sunnah of eating from it and feeding from it. So can I just knock all of that with 1 stone with the udhiyah? The answer would be yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that you'd get the objective. It's permissible. You will eat from it. You will feed from it. But the fuqaha, at least the Hanbali fuqaha, say it's wajib to give charity with a portion of the animal. How much? We'll mention it. Even a small portion would count. So that would not be achieved in the walima. So what if a person says, well, I will invite, because they say gift, I'll mention it later on inshallah, but they say, a person could say, I'll invite a few poor people to the walima. So then I'll feed them as well. And then I'll get all three. I've eaten, I fed as a gift to people, and then I've given charity as well, all three in the walima. Would that count? The answer would be it would not count. It would not count in terms of charity. Why? Because charity, the ulama say two things. Number one, when you're giving this charity of udhiyah, we're going to mention it better than this. I'm just passing by it. You have to give raw meat. You have to give raw meat. Number two, which is the main point, you have to make them, just like zakah, you have to make people the owner of this charity. So the owner, you give them the meat, they become the owner of this meat, they can do what they like with it. But in a walima, or when you invite somebody to eat at your house, the food that you present and they take into their plate, they don't become owners of the food yet. This is called ibaha. It's like a permission. They can just eat out of permission. It's okay for them to eat. But they can't come with a container and go to your pot and start filling in. It's not like that. They do not become owners of it. So when it's in the plate, it's still not. But once they put it in their mouth, now they're owners of it. So now this point doesn't count for udhiyah. To become an owner at this point doesn't count. It's only now you can't. So if you could own the meat at a walima or something, you could go with a container and fill up from the pot as you wish. But that's not how it works. That's only ibaha. It's only like a permission to eat in that. So it won't count. So because one of the rules of zakah is that you إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِي, that the charity you give is a li, it's a tamlik. You make them the owner of this wealth of zakah, or you make them the owner of this meat that you are giving to them. So at a walima, it's not going to be tamlik, it's going to be ibaha. It's going to be ibaha. So you could then duel the intention, but save a portion of the meat and then give it as charity raw, and making the people you're giving it to as charity, the owners of this meat, that they can do what they wish. And in a walima, this way will not be owners. They will not be owners of it. So we've covered the masaail I wish to, inshallah. We'll finish the rest over the next few weeks, inshallah. Wa we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to benefit us with that which He teaches us, and to teach us that which benefits us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.